You're not
recognized either. You can't just speak anytime you want.
I'm the chair of this committee.
That's not how it
Ms.
works.
Stansbury,
Madam.
you're not recognized.
Madam Chairwoman, that is not how part.
Ms. Stansbury, you're not recognized. The gentleman yields. No one loves veterans more than President Trump, and he's made that apparent. That's why he's working for peace
Madam Chair,
right now.
it's not your time right now.
I'm the chair of this committee.
That's not how
I'm the chair.
parliamentary procedure works.
You're not
Madam
recognized, Ms.
Chairwoman.
Stanberry.
Why was Marjorie Taylor Greene slamming her gavel and shouting about veterans in the middle of a congressional hearing? And what had Congresswoman Stanberry so fed up she had to stop everything? This video breaks down the chaotic moment that turned Congress into a circus, and you won't believe who stole the show. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video.
Point of order.
Okay.
Point of order.
All right, Madam Chair, calm down. Let's move on.
Ms. Stansbury, you're not recognized. Point of order.
Madam Chair, I've got oh, I'm sorry, you had a point of order.
So,
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, can we decide who's going to speak first and we don't?
Day, but that's not how
Ms. Stansbury, you're not
parliamentary-
recognized.
We're going to get you a Robert's
Ms.
Rules of
Stansbury,
Order
you're
and
not-
the committee-
point of
Ms.
order.
Stansbury,
So
you're
that
not
you can-
recognized.
so that
Point
you
of
can
order.
Understand parliamentary procedure.
Absolutely, I'm the chair of this committee, and Mr.
I know
Gill,
that,
Mr.
but-
Gill from Texas
There
is
you go.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Imagine this, a congressional hearing where the purpose seems to be less about actual governance and more about who can shout the loudest. And sitting smack in the center of the chaos, none other than Marjorie Taylor Greene. Picture her, gavel in hand, throwing parliamentary procedures out the window as if they were an annoying guest at a party she didn't want there. That's the scene we're diving into, a perfect combination of theater, irritation, and sheer disbelief. Greene wasn't just participating in the hearing, she was essentially overpowering it. Every few minutes, there she was, slamming her gavel and interrupting like the meeting was her personal talk show. Somehow, her outburst always circled back to the same topic, veterans. Over and over, Greene demanded attention, claiming to be the loudest defender of veterans in the room, even when it had zero relevance to the larger discussion. Honestly, you have to admire the stamina it takes to turn a hearing into your personal soapbox, though you probably won't catch Congresswoman Jasmine Stanberry applauding her for it anytime soon. Stanberry was visibly fed up, and frankly, could you blame her?
Are going to continue to live through chaos and destruction that has been occurring ever since he swore in January. And I hope y'all remember who caused this, because it wasn't
The
just
gentlelady's time has
it was
expired.
Also the congressional Republicans.
The
who don't
gentlelady's
have a
time
spine to do
has
what's right.
expired.
And last I checked, congressional approval is not, and I think that bears witness.
Madam Chair, I have a unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you so much.
I now recognize Mr. Burchett from Tennessee.
Thank you, Chair Lady. I would remind members of both sides of the aisle that President Trump's approval rating is soaring.
Meanwhile, the Democrats on the panel made valiant attempts to corral the conversation back on track. It was kind of like trying to herd cats, except the cats are shouting about government overreach and patriotism. To give you an idea of just how disruptive things got, Greene's marathon of interruptions included an impromptu rant about how Democrats don't care about our veterans. This tirade popped up out of nowhere and utterly derailed a discussion that had absolutely nothing to do with veterans at that point. It wasn't so much a rational argument as it was performance art, the political theater equivalent of grabbing a handheld mic and yelling, "Are you not entertained?" Stanberry, though, wasn't buying the act for a second. As Greene escalated her antics, Stanberry's responses grew sharper. At one point, she made it clear that Greene's behavior was doing more harm than good, calling out the lack of decorum and the unnecessary chaos it was causing. You could tell Stanberry wasn't just annoyed, she was downright exasperated. And here's where it got particularly spicy. Stanberry reminded Greene in no uncertain terms that contributing to an actual discussion might help veterans a lot more than shouting about them. Touché. The tension in the room kept building, with every one of Greene's interruptions adding more fuel to the fire. And then came the turning point. Stanberry called her out directly, putting the spotlight squarely on Greene's effects on the hearing. Suddenly, the conversation shifted. What had been a free-for-all of shouting and finger-pointing now had a clear antagonist, and it was Greene. Stanberry didn't do it with any dramatic flair either. She simply called out the obvious. When the loudest voice in the room is more interested in scoring rhetorical points than actually addressing addressing policy, something's got to give. The room didn't literally applaud, but you could sense the energy shift. People noticed. To be fair, Green didn't seem fazed. If anything, she seemed to revel in the attention, continuing with her interruptions as if the confrontation had never happened. That's the thing about Green. She operates in her own bubble, where the louder she gets, the more she believes she's winning the argument. It's almost impressive how unapologetically she stays on brand, no matter how much wreckage she leaves in her wake. And yet, for all the disruption and drama, this was just the appetizer in the circus that was this hearing. Green's gavel antics and veterans' monologues were certainly headline-worthy, but they weren't the only spectacle in town. No, this hearing had layers of absurdity, and Green's chaotic energy was only the start. Just wait until you hear how the MAGA crew tied Donald Trump's approval ratings into the mix. It's a roller coaster you won't want to miss. Then, in walked Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who was clearly done with the nonsense. She wasn't about to let Burchett's statement slide. With her signature mix of sharp wit and no-nonsense tone, Crockett called him out, asking what on earth he was talking about. And really, it was a fair question. This wasn't a campaign rally, and yet here they were, debating Trump's popularity levels as if this was going to solve anything. Crockett didn't mince her words either. First off, what the hell are you talking about? She said, capturing the mood of everyone who was still trying to figure out why this tangent existed. You could almost hear the collective facepalm from people on the panel wondering how they got to this point. But Crockett wasn't just irritated, she came prepared. She wasn't content to simply call Burchett out. No, she wanted receipts. And what better way to pop the MAGA fantasy balloon than with actual numbers? While Burchett was busy imagining Trump sitting on some imaginary approval throne, Crockett suggested doing what most of us learned in middle school, checking the facts. She requested Trump's latest poll numbers be read aloud and put on record, and spoiler alert, those numbers were not soaring, they weren't even hovering. Trump's polling is literally like the worst in presidential history, Crockett later said, and she wasn't wrong. The numbers made it loud and clear. Trump's approval ratings looked less soaring, and more like a bird that had forgotten how to fly. What Crockett accomplished in that moment was more than just embarrassing Burchett for his lack of evidence. She exposed something much deeper. The entire debate showcased the disconnect between MAGA Republicans' version of reality and, well, the actual reality that the rest of us exist in. Burchett's statement wasn't just false. It was part of a broader pattern. MAGA world doesn't just misread data, it invents data to fit the narrative. And Crockett called that out in real time, turning the discussion back to facts instead of fantasies. What really stood out wasn't just Crockett's frustration, it was the precision with which she dismantled Burchett's claim. In front of everyone, she took his vague, feel-good MAGA talking point and flipped it on its head. It was the equivalent of pulling out a calculator during an argument over math and showing your opponent step by step how the numbers don't add up. Only here, the numbers weren't just disappointing, they were downright embarrassing. One poll Crockett cited actually showed Trump with some of the lowest approval ratings of any past president. Imagine describing that as soaring. It's like trying to sell a soggy sandwich as gourmet cuisine. Throughout all this, Crockett didn't hold back her criticism of the hearing's bizarre direction. She made it clear that taking a detour into Trump poll talk was not only pointless, but also pretty insulting to the seriousness of the hearing's original focus. This wasn't supposed to be a MAGA fan meeting, it was supposed to be a constructive discussion, but as Crockett pointed out, it's hard to have one of those when you've got people like Burchett trying to drag the panel into campaign fantasy land. The more Crockett spoke, the clearer it became just how stark the divide was between those pushing the MAGA narrative and those sticking to actual data. While Burchett was busy spinning a story, Crockett was pulling out evidence as if to remind everyone that reality does in fact still exist, no matter how loudly you shout over it. The Democrats on the panel seemed to back her up, reinforcing the idea that any claims should first and foremost be grounded in fact. But the Republicans? They leaned into the fantasy, staying quiet on Crockett's data points. Not exactly a strong rebuttal when the numbers are working against you. Say what you will about RFK Jr., but subtlety is not his strong suit. Now, let's pause for a second. This is the same RFK Jr. who has spent most of his airtime warning Americans about the dangers of big pharma, big tech, and let's not forget, big government. He's practically built his entire platform on the idea that some shadowy entity is lurking, waiting to snatch your freedoms. And yet, here he is, pitching a future where every single American straps on a wearable device that tracks their health metrics. A proposal that sounds like Alexa's overly ambitious cousin. The irony, of course, was not lost on anyone paying attention. MAGA Republicans, his main supporters, have spent years warning that Democrats are preparing to spy on Americans, compiling data from everything from social media to your grocery receipts. Remember how they turned mask mandates into dystopian government overreach? Or how they flipped out about vaccine passports turning into some kind of citizen tracking program? According to their playbook, the government keeping tabs on your movements or health data is the end of freedom as we know it, unless apparently it's their guy proposing it. Then it's just making America healthy again. Democratic lawmakers were practically spoon-fed this contradiction, and oh, did they run with it. Congresswoman Barragan in particular wasted no time drilling RFK Jr. on this grand vision of wearable-clad Americans. But she didn't stop there. She also hit him hard over another one of his proposals, a nearly $1.7 billion cut to the National Institute on Aging, the federal agency that leads research into Alzheimer's and other age-related diseases. That proposal came from the same guy who says he's committed to solving Alzheimer's. So just to recap, everyone should wear a health tracker, but don't expect money for research into one of the key diseases it would hypothetically track. Barragan wasn't the only one calling out RFK Jr.'s strange take on public health. Congresswoman Ruiz stepped in to press on an entirely separate point, the slipshod way RFK Jr. handles data. Apparently some of his supporting evidence wasn't just wrong, it didn't even exist. And it wasn't just Barragan and Ruiz pointing out these glaring issues. Other Democrats in the room were quick to join the pile-on, dissecting both RFK Jr.'s claims and what they revealed about the larger MAGA strategy. One of the most obvious points made was just how little thought seems to go into these proposals. RFK Jr. didn't provide any clarity on how these wearables would be rolled out or funded, what agency would oversee them, or even how they would work. It was just the broad strokes of an idea that somehow managed to be both invasive and incomplete. Then there was the silence. GOP members in attendance, who could have used this opportunity to distance themselves from the chaos or even critique the inconsistencies in RFK Jr.'s statements, said pretty much nothing. It was a rare moment where they seemed to understand that contradicting themselves further in the defense of RFK Jr. as half-baked ideas wasn't worth the effort. And let's face it, they've probably gotten so skilled at ignoring irony that they don't even notice it anymore. This wasn't just about RFK Jr. fumbling through a hearing though. His statements and proposals unintentionally peeled back the curtain on what drives so much of MAGA Republican rhetoric, projection. For all the talk about opposing government overreach and protecting personal freedoms, their hypocrisy often screams louder than their words. People who cried tyranny when asked to wear a cloth mask during a global pandemic now seem totally fine with a future where everyone wears a government-approved health tracker. You almost have to admire the audacity. By the end of RFK Jr.'s time in the hot seat, he'd managed to reinforce one key idea. Nothing about this hearing was grounded in logic or consistency. Democrats walked away with plenty of new sound bites highlighting the absurdity of MAGA rhetoric, while Republicans just quietly shuffled along. And as wild as RFK Jr.'s remarks were, they felt strangely fitting for a spectacle that had abandoned all pretense of decorum about 5 minutes into Green's first gavel slam. These bizarre contradictions, just the final act in a hearing that summed up the chaos better than anything else. The hearing peeled back the mask on MAGA Republican rhetoric, exposing contradictions that were impossible to ignore. They've spent years raging against government tracking, yet sat silent as RFK Jr. pitched health monitoring devices for every American. It's selective outrage at its finest, principles that vanish when the narrative doesn't fit. And let's not forget the broader chaos, from Green's performative interruptions to Burchett's fantasy poll numbers. Their actions revealed more than just political theater. It showed a movement struggling with its own contradictions. So keep questioning, keep watching, and stay tuned, because these political circuses aren't going anywhere anytime soon.